The Eugene Johnson Show. The Eugene Johnson Show. The Eugene Johnson Show.
Hello everyone, this is Eugene Johnson with the Crypto Crew. I talked to Tom yesterday and I wanted to make a video telling you a little bit about my paranormal experiences. Unfortunately, I've never encountered Bigfoot. I've always wanted to. I mean, the books I've read and the history and the searching and stuff that I've done, to me he exists because, I mean, even way back to my roots of my ancestors, you know, I've got some Native American blood in me and also Irish and German, so I mean, and all those cultures have you know, a theory of Bigfoot from many years ago. So I mean, it's, you know, to me there's no question about it. But the video I'm doing is going to be a little bit different. It took me a while to get the courage up to tell everybody about my experience. I've got quite a few experiences actually, and they all started happening about the time I was about 18. I live in an apartment complex now, and nothing's happened here, but in the past years, way back, I had a lot of activity happen in my life. So I will start out with one, and maybe give you 3 or 4 stories that's happened to me. And also, I am a Christian man. I've been a reborn Christian for the past 11 years. I was baptized on about 3 days before my 19th birthday. So altogether, it's been about 11 years since I was baptized and saved, and I have no reason to lie. I've never lied to my grandparents. I never lied to my uncle. I've never lied to anybody, because there's really no sense in lying to somebody. So I've always been a big believer that you don't lie and you try to be as honest as you can. So anyway, to get matters going, I will start with the first story. This is one that absolutely terrified me when I was about 23. I was about 23 or 22 at the time. And it happened on a dark stretch of country road. I'm from Winchester, Kentucky, and the place I'm talking is Clark County. And the place I'm talking about is just outside of Clark County, and well, it's inside Clark County, but it's way out in the woods in the country. And I'm talking, this place, you know, it's like 2 to 3 miles to the next house. It's remote, and there's an area down through there. It's called Red River Road, and I've read on other Bigfoot's research sites and stuff like that there's actually been a Bigfoot encounter down there. I can't remember who encountered it, and it was way back in the 70s, but I read that on the BFRO website. So, but I mean, here in Kentucky, you know, we live just inside the city of Winchester, really small city. But if you're going to have any experiences, there's 2 roads, and the second road I'll bring up here a bit later. But the second road is called Muddy Creek, and the first road is called Red River Road. But anyway, on to my story. Back when I was about 22 or 23, my grandfather was a very protective, overprotective kind of type of grandfather, which, you know, is normal. I was raised with my grandfather and grandparents and my uncle. I'm 32, will be 32 this year, so I mean, I grew up with them all my life, from the time I was a baby, a newborn, almost newborn baby, up till now. Well, you know, up till I got my own place, and that unfortunately was because my grandmother and my grandpa passed away. My grandfather passed away in 2009, and my grandmother passed away in 2003. And this happened after my grandfather got remarried. I think it was either around maybe 2007, maybe 2006 or 7, somewhere around through there. But I remember I didn't get my license till I was 19 years old, and I rode around with a permit till then, and then I finally got my license. And my grandfather always wanted me in at a certain time at night, which is understandable. But you know, me growing up a little bit and, you know, being 22, 23 years old, one night I decided to go out and, you know, just hang out downtown a little while and, you know, see what I could find. So I was driving a 1998 Ford Explorer, blue, Kentucky blue, and so I went downtown and I pulled in the parking lot, which a lot of young guys would do back then. And basically at that time I was just looking for girls, you know, no lie there. And all of a sudden these group of girls come up and wanted to go riding out in the country, which, you know, country boys, you know, if you're out and don't have any money to do anything with, you know, and you got some gas, you got extra gas money, you just put gas money in your vehicle. The thing to do is ride out in the country, just look around, talk, you know, park in deserted, you know, areas around that road and just sit and talk. So they came up to me and they asked if, you know, I wanted to go out and ride around. So I said, yeah. And then, you know, as the night evolved, it was probably 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning at that point. I was joined by another group of girls in a car that followed me down to Red River Road. And there's a little turnoff almost at the end of the road where you can park, and there's a little creek area. And so we parked there, and me having a four-wheel drive, you know, I could get into it and back out and no problem, because 98 Explorer stays in four-wheel drive as long as you're going, you know, below 30 miles an hour. It stays in four-wheel drive, which is pretty handy. So we were sitting there and we were talking. I was parked, you know, in this like kind of like dip, and in front of us was the creek, and we were all sitting there talking. And of course the girls in the car had to park up next to the road because they couldn't make it down there and get back out. So we were sitting there talking. It got kind of late, and one of the girls in the back seat of the Explorer said that it was, you know, it was getting kind of late and she had to go home. So, you know, I was like, all right, and I started to, you know, start the truck and back out and take her home. But her and her friends decided to go out and get in the car and leave with those group of girls with no big problems, because I was fixing to fire up the truck anyway and head back home. So anyway, they leave and I'm down there completely by myself. It's probably 3:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. It's in the summer. I had all the windows rolled down in my Explorer, and I back out, and, you know, being a curvy backcountry road, I'm taking my time. So I back out and head down the road. And there's nothing on this road whatsoever at, you know, 3 o'clock in the morning. There's no traffic, nobody's out. It's one of these roads where, you know, the driveways lead quite a ways back to the home if you turn on the driveway. And there's not too many driveways down through that area. So I get to maybe the middle of Red River Road. I'm gonna say probably about a 20-mile stretch through there. And so I'm right in the middle of Red River Road, where there's no houses, there's just woods, fields, and fences on the side of the road. And I remember all of a sudden these two really bright lights appeared behind me. And it was nothing like I'd ever seen before. I can tell the difference between a big truck or a car headlights. It's really easy to do. I mean, after you drove a while and, drove at night, you can tell if it's a truck or a car usually. But I remember it very, very well because when whatever this was got behind me, it was right in my bumper. I had all the windows down. And this light source, it was two lights, looked just like headlights from a car, an old car, because they were round. And, well, the way older model BMW's headlights are, if you know what I'm talking about. But the thing that got me was there was absolutely no sound of any engines except my car. The only engine I could hear was the sound of my own engine in the Explorer. But what really frightened me was the lights lit up my Explorer so much that, I mean, going from complete blackness, in the vehicle to almost bright as daytime. And this really, kind of scared me, got on my nerves a little bit because, I've hunted for many years. I've been out in the woods for many years. I can tell the difference between tracks. I can tell the difference between animal calls. I was always one of the fearless kids that if somebody sat there and said, well, I'm not going anywhere near, that house or anywhere near those woods, I was the first one in the woods or that house, which I'm surprised I never got arrested. But, I was always the fearless kid that I'm not scared of any man. But whatever this was brightened up the cab of the truck so much that, I mean, if I had a novel, in front of me, I could have read every word, no problem at all. And I wear glasses. And, but whatever this was, it was bright and kept on my bumper. I was going about maybe 30 miles an hour at that point. And I first thought it was a car. Thought it was a car that had its brights on and was just being a jerk. So the next thing I did was, kind of stupid now, but I mean, I was comfortable enough to, I put both hands on the wheel and I basically, put the gas halfway down. And every turn, every curve that I took, I could hear the tires squealing on my Explorer, and this thing was still on my bumper. So by the time that this happened, like I said, I was in the middle of Red River Road, and by the time maybe about 2 or 3 miles, I was going 80. And this, whatever this was still on my bumper. So I pressed the gas a little bit more and went up to 95 miles an hour, still on my bumper. There's a fork in the road, on the other side of the road, down, I'm gonna say the south side of the road. You go all the way down, there's a fork where you can turn. There's no houses or anything. Like I said, just farmland, fields, barns, stuff like it with no houses on them, because that's what a lot of people do here. They'll have a house in the city or a house somewhere else, and they will have land that they go and check their cows or whatever in, or their barns, keep their equipment or whatever in their barns. But there's no houses, and it's mostly fenced off, and whatever wasn't fenced off is just pure woods. So I remember right before I got to the fork in the road, where there was finally lamp posts to light the intersection there, the fork, to see where you were going. Whatever was behind me completely, it went black again in my cab of my Explorer. It went completely black, and I remember looking in the rearview mirror, not seeing nothing, not hearing nothing. But what really gave me chills was the fact that I just passed the area with no driveways. And if whatever this was had turned, it would have had to go through a fenced area. It would have had to go through the fence and would have ended up in a field, whether he went left or right. Whatever this was, if it went left or right, it would have ended up in a field and through a fence, because there's no driveways at that area. So, being 22 or 23 at the time, I was of age to have a firearm in my vehicle. I had a 9mm Ruger with a 9-round clip, and I stopped and I rolled the windows up the first thing, because I was already, worried. I still thought it was a car. I was, trying to convince myself it was a car, and this guy was being a jerk, and I thought maybe he turned his lights out and just stopped. But the glare from, the light from the light post up ahead of me, just out of reach, was light enough where I looked in my rear view and I didn't see nothing. So I figured maybe he might have pulled off the side of the road and I didn't see him. So, I opened up the lock box that I had my 9mm Ruger in. I pulled out my clip and I put it in, cocked it back, and it was ready to go. And I opened up the driver's side door, got out, went behind my vehicle and looked all around, walked down the road maybe 5-10 feet down the road to look, and there was absolutely nothing on that road. It was just silent. No bugs, no any creature at night that usually makes noise at night. It was completely silent. At that point, I was standing in the middle of the road with a gun in my hand, and I kind of felt like an idiot because I didn't know what was going on. I was kind of naive at that point. I still didn't believe, that it was just two lights that I couldn't explain. I didn't believe that, didn't want to believe it. So I stood there in the middle of the road with my pistol by my side loaded, and that's when I got the feeling, and I'm sure 90% of you know the feeling of where you're standing somewhere and it feels like you're being constantly watched, and you get this feeling that maybe you're going to be attacked if you don't get out of there. I got that feeling, I got the feeling to the left of me. So I kind of, turned and kept my gun pointed at that direction, and I kept the gun pointed in that direction. One certain spot that I felt that something was standing there in those woods, and I kept my gun pointed at that spot, and I got back in my Explorer, and I took off as fast as I can till I made it to town. And after I made it to town and back home, my grandpa was already asleep. His new wife was already asleep. So I, come in, locked the door, and I went straight to my room, shut the door, laid on my bed, and, just relaxed a little bit. And then I fell asleep. And I woke up the next day, and that's when I started thinking about stuff. And that's when I couldn't explain what the hell it was that followed me. So I went back down to Red River Road in the daytime, and I checked the road. I checked the same spot. There was no car tracks, no nothing on the side of the road, nothing. And I mean, it had rained previously that day, so if any car would have pulled off the side of the road into where the banks were muddy, there would have been tracks. There would have been tracks on the road, because I drove a little bit farther to where I was parked that night at the creek, and you could see my tracks where I backed out and, headed straight, home, towards home, south. And you could see my tracks very clearly for a certain amount of, miles, but then they disappeared because, the tires got dry. But yeah, that I still cannot explain what that was. A lot of people have said it might have been a ghost, and then I've got people on the other side of the fence saying it could have been a a UFO, which I kind of lean towards more the UFO theory, because maybe I was there while while maybe a ship had landed in a field and I was fixing to run up on it, and they heard my vehicle coming up the road. So they used a diversion to get behind me to chase me up the hill so I wouldn't see what they were doing in their ship. I mean, it could have been anything, so I don't know what that was. I don't, that was many years ago. I mean, almost 10 years ago now. And I still don't know what it was. And to be completely honest with you, I don't know if I want to know what it was. All I know is when the next day and I started thinking about it, and after I came back home from checking out the area, when I got back, I went back to my room and sat down on the side of the bed and just started shaking. Because I didn't know what this was, and I didn't know if it meant me any harm or not. Because when I got out of that vehicle that night and went to see what was going on, I felt like I've generally felt in my body that I was threatened, and that whatever this was going to hurt me if I didn't get out of there. So being human nature, when you feel threatened by something, first thing you do is run away. And so I started walking backwards very slowly to my vehicle. I had my vehicle on, it wasn't running, but I had the lights on in the vehicle and everything else, and it was sitting there. So, I backed slowly as I could with my gun pointed at those woods the whole time. And finally made it back to my vehicle. I got in, shut the door, locked everything, put my seatbelt on, put it in drive, and took off. And didn't come back till the next day. And like I said, when I went down there was no evidence whatsoever of anything following me that night. There was no tire tracks, nothing. So whatever this was had to be floating. Because there was no sign of nothing anywhere. And, there was nothing in the woods that I seen. No branches broke or anything. So I like I said, I've got two theories. It could have been a ghost maybe. But like I said, I'm more on the UFO side of that, because these lights were bright. And I mean, and I don't know how to explain it. I mean, they weren't just bright. They were like spotlight bright. And any hunter that has had a spotlight and has went spotlighting, and as long as you don't go during deer season, you can use a spotlight to spot animals on your property. My uncle used to do it, and so I remember him buying this spotlight, and it was one of the brightest lights I've ever seen in my life. And they are very bright, because I mean, if you take a spotlight and hold it straight up in the air, you'll see the beam for a long ways. I mean, if you got a regular spotlight, you can turn it on and point it straight up in the air, and if an airplane or a helicopter is passing by, they can see where you're at. It's how bright it is. This was the brightness of those lights, and there were two of them. So I mean, it was the whole front of my vehicle, where I was sitting, was completely lit up. And I mean, I got to thinking about it more, and it was basically like somebody standing on the back of my bumper with two small, very, very powerful spotlights stuck to the back of my Explorer, and right at the back of the window. And it was a hatchback, so it was like they were standing there with both those spotlights on the hatchback through the windows at the highest level the spotlights could go. And it hurt my eyes to look in the rearview mirror, but I mean, they were always there. They didn't stop. It probably followed me maybe for 10 miles or more. until I made it to the crossroads. But that was one of the most frightening experiences I had. And the second one was this was before I was followed. This happened when I was 18 years old, and this was in 2003. I'll never forget it as long as I live. But I had just went to bed, and my grandmother had been sick with cancer for about, I'm going to say maybe 4 months. And hospice has got involved, and, they basically, told us there's nothing you can do, just make her comfortable. So that was our intention, was to make her as comfortable as possible. She didn't want to go to a hospital. So I remember just going to bed, and one of the hospice people were actually in the living room, and I was in my room, and I was exhausted from everything going on. So I laid down, and I just had started to drift off. Everybody, I've told people this story, they think they thought I was asleep, half asleep. I know the difference between being half asleep and being wide awake. So anyway, I woke up, I drifted off, and I woke back up to turn over, as you normally do when you go to bed. I went to turn over on my side, and I looked in the corner of the room right next to my door, and there was this shadowy figure standing right next to the door. And I'm going to say that from floor to ceiling at my old house was probably maybe 10 feet, because I remember standing on my tiptoes, being a teenager, 18-year-old, just had turned man, 18 years old. I could stand on my tiptoes and take my 2 fingers and brush the top of the ceiling. But whatever this was, it was standing in my room, had to take its head and basically bend down where it could stand. It was that tall. And it looked like it was wearing like a very, very huge coat, like trench coat, because I remember it started moving toward me. It's slow at first, and it was kind of, I guess, stretching out its arms, and I remember seeing that it looked like it had wings, but I don't know if that was just a really long coat or what it was. But it stretched its arms out, and I'm going to say the arms on this thing could touch one side of my wall, and probably the other one standing in the middle of the room. So it stretched its arms out as much as it could without bumping into anything, and it started moving toward me real slow, and then all of a sudden it went really fast at the foot of my bed. I screamed. I was sitting in the middle of the bed, my eyes wide open, not blinking, not asleep, and I screamed. And about the time that I screamed, it completely disappeared. And I remember my dad or my grandpa running into the room and asked me if I'd had a nightmare. Well, at that time, I told them, yeah, I just had a nightmare. Because if I told them what I'd just seen, they would have thought I was crazy. So, they said, they thought I had a nightmare, and I wasn't even sure what I seen. But, I mean, as many years has passed since then, I remember it. I remember being wide awake, and whatever that was in my room, and it was coming right at me. So, the only thing I could do was scream. So I screamed, and, it was right at the foot of my bed, and as soon as I screamed, it disappeared. I have no explanation for it. I haven't seen it since then. I hope I never see it again. I told a good close personal friend of mine about it, and he thinks where my grandmother passed away 2 days later, he thinks that it was perhaps the spirit of death. I don't know what it was, but all I know is that I felt complete fear, paralyzing fear, where I could not move. The only thing I could do was lay against my headboard and look. So that was one of a very terrifying night. As a matter of fact, after that night I slept on the couch for a couple of nights because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it'd come back. But after my grandmother passed away, then I had to sleep on the couch for about a week because we had relatives come in from out of state. I went back to bed one night and I haven't seen it or heard it again. So that's the first one that I had. The second one with the lights was the most terrifying, in my opinion, that I had. That I was completely helpless and alone. And at least at home, I had my grandfather, my dad, and a couple of people that were in visiting from the other state because my grandmother was sick. All those people were there, so at least I had help. But most frightening was definitely the lights. I'll never forget that as long as I live. I don't want to make this a real long video. It's already 31 minutes. So I do have more experiences that I will tell. But I think I'm just going to tell those two right now, and maybe next week make another video and tell you about the others that I've had. But I just wanted to, contribute this to the group. Hope you guys don't think I'm completely crazy. Like I said, some of the people I've told, they think I'm completely crazy and a nut. But I've got a Bible underneath my setup that's holding the camera. So I'll put my hand on the Bible any day and tell you that what those two stories that I just told you is as true as rain coming down. I never will forget them as long as I live. I remember the fear that they caused in me, and that's the one thing I remember very, very well is the fear, because I have never in my life been that scared of anything. And the one that most terrified me was the incident at Red River Road. I will never forget that as long as I live. I'll go to my grave with it on my mind, because every time I go out in the country now, if we go anywhere out in the country, it's always on the back of my mind. I try my best not to go out in the country at dark, which I'm going to have to face my fears here in a few weeks, because and I might do some research up there too, but my fiance and me are planning on going to the land between the lakes, and from what I understand, there's some kind of dog man that's up in that area. So I will definitely, we're planning on renting a cabin. They have cabins that you can rent out in the woods, so I'm gonna have to face my fear and go out in the country again at night. So the plan is when I go there, I'm gonna probably sit outside on the front porch of the cabin that we rent and try to capture some sounds. I'm hoping so anyway. But until then, guys, this is Eugene Johnson from the Crypto Crew. Those are two of my paranormal experiences. I will definitely tell you more in the upcoming future. So I really appreciate you guys, and take care.
Очень